Now call to order the October 5th, 2017 meeting of the City of Nashua Planning Board. Mr. Secretary, could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Donches, Mike Peterson, Adam Varley,
Here?
Scott Leclerc,
Here.
Ed Weber, here. Alderman Sean McGinnis.
Here.
Alderman Thomas Lopez, Steve Dukraine, Dan Kelly, David Robbins,
Present.
Jerry Ubucci.
Here.
That's it.
Great. And we have a quorum and all regular members participating in voting. Next up, we have approval of the minutes from the September 14th, 2017 meeting.
So moved.
Did anyone have any questions or comments? I had one question for you, Mr. Weber. There was a motion, this was, let me see which project this was. This was on the Simon Street project, and the motion carried 6-2, and it has Engineer Ukraine and you, Mr. Weber, opposing. I wasn't sure if that should be Mr. Robbins.
I opposed.
You did?
Robbins and I both opposed.
I voted for the final, I
You did,
opposed.
okay.
Okay.
That's
So
fine, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
I had different, did anyone else have any questions, comments? Okay. So, Mr. Robbins, did you make a motion?
I would like to move that we accept the minutes.
Motion by Mr. Robbins to accept the minutes. Is there a second? Second. Second by Mr. Pucci. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstention.
Motion passes. Communications. Good evening, Linda.
Good evening. Excuse me. In your packet tonight, you received a few items. The first is regarding case number 2. We had gotten comments from engineering dated September 29th. Then we received comments from engineer Maynard, and then we got, just a couple hours ago, comments from engineering again. On case number 3, 62 to 64 Lake Street, when this was originally brought in, it was going to be a condominium. However, we received an email from the owner on October 4th that it's going to be multifamily rental. So what I did was amend the staff report and took out the stipulations that pertain to condominiums. So that's why you have an amended agenda. And then we also just recently received updated comments from engineering, and those are in your packet as well. Regarding other business case number 2, we have some minutes regarding the Planning and Economic Development Committee. And then finally, regarding other business case number 4, we have a memo from Tim Cummings regarding the sale of land to the hospital. And that's it.
Thank you. Report of committee and liaison. Mr. Weber?
I have none.
Nothing?
No meetings.
Okay. I'll now read the procedure for this evening's meeting. After the legal notice of each conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision plan is read by the chair, the board will determine if the application is complete and ready for the board to take jurisdiction. The public hearing will begin, at which time the applicant or representative will be given time to present an overview and description of their project. They shall speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations. The board will then have an opportunity to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant or staff. The chair will then ask for testimony from the audience. First, anyone wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan may speak. Please come forward to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. This will be the time to express your concerns or ask questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, testimony will come from anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan. The board may then ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant. And the applicant will be given a rebuttal period, at which time they shall respond to any concerns raised by the prior public testimony. One public member will be allowed to respond to only those items brought forth during the applicant's rebuttal period. After this has been completed, the public hearing will end, and the board will resume the public meeting, at which time the board will deliberate and vote on the application before us. We ask that both sides keep the remarks to the subject at hand and to not repeat what has already been said. We want to be fair to everyone and make the best possible decision based on the testimony presented and considering all applicable approval criteria established in the National Revised Ordinances. Thank you for your interest and courteous attention. I ask you please turn off your cell phones at this time. Old business conditional special use permits, none. Old business subdivision plans, none. Old business site plans, case number 1. That case has been postponed indefinitely. New business conditional special use permits, none. New business subdivision plans. Case number 2. Crimson Properties owner, application and acceptance of proposed 2-lot subdivision. Property is located at 407 Main Dunstable Road, Sheet C, Lot 65. Zone suburban residence, and this project is located in Ward 5.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Robbins?
after reviewing the packet that we received on this in our folder just a few moments ago, I raised the issue of whether or not this case is ready to move forward. And I would ask that we explore that issue before accepting.
Okay. And maybe, do you want to elaborate on particularly what your concerns are?
Well, here, again, I'm seeing this 20 minutes ago and reading through it, and it appears as though the applicant was sent a letter on the 29th of September by Ms. Walker. The applicant responded, letter dated October 2nd, and then a letter dated today, which I understand came in fairly, sometime today, October 5th. Gene Walker, who's the deputy manager of engineering for the city, sent a point-by-point letter to the applicant, and it appears to me as though there are some significant issues here that need to be addressed before I would be comfortable accepting the case, including numbers 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10 in the letter.
So what I hear you saying is essentially is that because we've only received this letter back from engineering this evening, as you said, just before the meeting, and there are some material issues raised in that letter, you think we should have some more time for the engineering department and the applicant to address these issues before we take the case?
Well, I'm honestly not sure, because I've never been involved in this in the 4+ years I've been on the board. I've never encountered this situation in this way. I am uncomfortable based on the information presented to me right now, just looking at this, accepting the case, because there are ramifications to that, there are time limits, and at the same time, I am not sure of the proper way to proceed or what the implications of making various decisions are. If we voted not to proceed, I'm not sure what would happen. If we voted to proceed and then for some reason decided that the presentation was not something that we were comfortable with, we would need to turn it down or seek some kind of agreement. And I'd just like to explore it before we get into a situation where we're forced to make certain decisions that might not be in anybody's best interest.
Sure. So, I mean, certainly if we were to accept it, and then, as you said, we were determined that we weren't comfortable moving forward, that would start the 60 or 65-day period running, within which we'd have to make a decision. So if we were to get to a point where we said, you know, we're not comfortable that we have sufficient information to make a decision tonight, we would be bound by that clock, except to the extent that the applicant was, you know, willing to waive the time frame. If we determined that the application was not complete and did not accept it, I guess I would ask staff, we would have to renotice? It would be a new public hearing for the application if we were to?
Noticed it, right?
Yeah, it's been noticed already.
You'd have to, technically, we should renotice it, because if you don't take jurisdiction tonight, accept it as being complete, then we should renotice the property, yes.
So it would be put on at a later
Right,
date?
because you can't table it, because you aren't accepting.
We can't table because it's not even
Right.
before us, right? Right, so if we.
Please respond to all these issues?
Just a moment, because we're actually not in the public hearing because we haven't accepted the plan.
Executive session.
So
Excuse me, you are in a public hearing because you're considering the application acceptance.
we're not considering the application, but, Mr. Robbins, so your point, as Roger was just saying, we couldn't, consider a motion to table, for example, because the application isn't before us for action. So I think the bottom line is, if we were to determine that we weren't going to accept the plan tonight because we didn't view it as being complete, then it would have to be re-noticed for a future meeting. And if we did accept it and then determined we couldn't make a decision, then again, we'd be bound by the time clock, subject to waiver by the applicant. So, Mr. Weber, Mr. Pucci, you both had comments?
Yeah, I have a question for staff. With everything that's in the engineering, would that significantly change the site plan or the
The subdivision?
subdivision? Would that change what we're looking at now? Could that, engineering, what she's asking for, would that make changes, and we'd be looking at something entirely could be different than what we see tonight with those engineering changes?
I mean, it could, but I'm not an engineer, so I honestly don't know.
Mr. Pucci?
Yeah, I see the letter from the 29th, the issues raised. And if I was just going to translate this in the same amount of time Mr. Robbins had to look at it, very few minutes, I'm looking at it like the city engineer raised some issues, the applicant addressed those issues, the city engineer maybe doesn't like the way the applicant addressed them and doesn't seem like they were satisfied. I don't feel like I can make a determination on whether or not whose position is fair here without hearing the applicant's explanation of why he thinks his October 2nd letter covers the issues that were raised in the September 29th letter. I would at least like to hear that. I realize maybe he can't address the October 5th one, maybe he can, but,
No, that's fine. So, Engineer Mayor, what I'm going to give you the opportunity to do is address this issue as to the completeness of the application, but I just want to be clear that we're not discussing the application itself at this time, so.
For the record, I disagree with that statement. You are addressing the application acceptance. That does require input from the applicant himself.
Yes, what I want to be clear about is that we're not addressing the substance
Clarification
of
for the record.
the application right now. I just want to make that distinction.
Attorney Varley, you know I have to put that on the record. If I ever had to take something to court, you have to raise it in
Right.
in the
Just,
thing.
I just wanted to make that distinction clear.
Anyway, the issues in this particular thing, once again, have to do with the type of house you choose to build on the building lot and its layout and where the driveway goes. That's all this is again. This is the same thing. We're creating a lot tonight for a building, but the building has not been selected yet, it's not been designed, it's not laid out, so. Engineering department forgets, as we argued last time I was here, we're creating a building lot. We don't have a final house. The house on there is illustrative to give you an idea how it might look. And the main purpose on these plans to show a house on there is to demonstrate that it won't intrude in the wetland setback, that there's plenty of room for a house, and to give you an idea where the driveway might go with regard to site distance. Everything else has to do with the building permit plan, where you lay out the house, you give the driveway grades, et cetera. Her latest letter is just re-clarifying what she said already, that I responded to in my letter that she responded to. So, so there's nothing new here, and it all has to do with the layout of the house, the grades of the house and the grades of the driveway, and on-site issues like that. These are normally and can always be taken care of during the building permit plan, as they always are, and that is what I said in my letter. She did not disagree with any of that, so no matter what she wrote, it's not going to change this subdivision plan. The plan you're approving is on the left. That's the plan that gets approved and goes to the registry. The one on the right is just to give you an idea of what can be, how the lot may be laid out. So this application, with regard to subdivision rules, RSAs, is complete with regard to subdivision 1 into 2. Same issue as we had the last meeting I was here when I got a little annoyed and angry, but anyway, this is the same issue here. You can't design a house until you know what the home purchaser wants to put there. Side entry garage, two-story house, front entry garage, all these things come into play. And whatever I show in this plan is purely illustrative. It's not final. It's not subject to any kind of final engineering review, any of these things. Engineer Walker is just telling us what we need to be concerned about before we get a building permit, and that's one of the stipulations suggested in the staff report, that we satisfy all her concerns in her various letters, so in that regard, we are a complete application.
Mr. Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it be possible, if Mr. Maynard agrees, for him to go through point by point and very briefly explain?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we want to get into the point by point again, because we haven't accepted the application.
Okay.
So as I indicated to Engineer Maynard, I really don't want to get into the substantive review of the application if we haven't accepted it yet.
Well, I'll tell you what comes up for me, and I appreciate Mr. Maynard's explanation and what was going on, but as I look at this letter, number one, this is the October 5th letter. No stormwater documents were received by this office. No certification letter was provided to the engineering department. Now, is that something that we absolutely need before we review an application, or as Mr. Maynard, I believe, says, that this is something that would be provided once a housing plan was approved or presented? So I don't know. That's why I raised that issue.
Right.
Okay, may I clarify, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
That certification letter is in the hands of the planning department. I don't know where Engineer Walker's copy of that letter is, and it's not material. It's the typical letter given on single-family houses where you put the leach and catch basin in it, and the letter certifies that that's adequate for the, handle the storm drainage. That's not material to anything here, other than we certify to this and we provide the leach and catch basin. I think planning staff can verify that.
Could staff verify?
I did receive one. However, I did talk to Engineer Walker today, and she said that she had not received one.
Okay. And do you know
And it-
when you received that?
With the application.
Okay.
It is supposed to be submitted with the application.
Yeah, I don't know what happens in engineering. You hand the package over to some unknown individual, and then it goes someplace. I have no clue where it goes over there. I can't give it to Jean Walker. She's too busy. Anyway, it's not material.
I have a question for staff, yeah.
Claire?
For a subdivision plan, I guess I'm a little bit confused too. The comments seem to be a mix of site plan and subdivision related. Like a grading plan, I thought we could subdivide without even touching grading.
You can typically,
Right,
though,
yeah.
we do get these with subdivision plans from other engineers. We do
Yeah,
have them.
right.
Something like stormwater documents or stormwater report, that should have been received with the application.
Yeah.
We did get it, but
That's the
Engineer
timing.
Walker is saying she didn't. I would like to just also say that because of some of the issues that Engineer Walker was having with this, the condition of approval that we have on here, number 5, was that prior to the chair signing the plan, that these comments would be addressed, just so that before the plan got recorded, we'd be comfortable with that. So it's going to be before building permit that we would need to be comfortable with with everything.
Right.
Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, I have a real concern about the letter, the last letter, the October 5th letter. And it's this statement here: "The city is experiencing ongoing problems with development of new lots, including illicit or non-conforming driveways, the creation of abutter drainage issues, work without proper permits and approvals, puddling, improper right-of-way reconstruction, and erosion issues." I can't understand why the city is having those problems, but I don't believe it has anything to do with the planning board approving a subdivision. If those problems exist, and I believe they do exist, I think that's a huge issue for the city. And I really want to spend a lot of time getting to the bottom of why those things happen. But that doesn't seem pertinent to this. And I'm really curious why it's in this letter. It just seems like it doesn't belong in this letter unless it's targeting this applicant. So if it is, I'd rather have it laid out there. And if you're gonna say something wasn't done, or these things haven't been done, I wanna see the facts on that. I wanna see the locations. I wanna see where people have failed. What engineering companies have failed, or what builders have failed. I wanna see all those facts, not just an innuendo that we've had this problem over the years, so now we want this done. That doesn't seem fair to anybody. And that's the way I'm reading it, and if I'm reading it wrong, maybe the engineering department can straighten me out, but I don't see how the ongoing issue of whether or not the city can enforce its rules, or the code enforcement group can enforce violations, I don't see what any of that has to do with what we're doing. So that's my input on that.
Yeah. Alderman McGinnis?
Yeah, it just seems to me that if they're, this is a site plan, are they in compliance?
Subdivision, yeah.
What?
Subdivision, sorry.
Subdivision. But are they in compliance at this point in time? Because some of this is, like Jerry suggests, doesn't really belong.
Right.
I mean, are they in compliance? I mean, we have to follow the rules.
Yeah. Gotta
And
make
some of this is subjective. Can we make judgments on, that's my point. Are they, there's certain things that are typically done, his staff says, but typical isn't necessarily required. Yeah.
Mr. Weber?
Number 5 is gonna take care of all of this stuff that we're having trouble with.
You're talking about the condition in the...
Yeah, in the thing. That's gonna take care of all of this, and allowing it to go forward should be able to go forward, and we're not looking at a site plan. They're gonna be coming back with a site plan.
Well, no, they
And-
won't be coming back with a site plan.
But not for residential.
Oh,
But I think you're right in the sense, and this goes to Mr. Rapucci's point, I think, which is, I think the obligation of the planning board is to make sure that, number one, if the issues are sufficiently material that we generally can't review the plan, then we don't accept it. But number two, if the engineering department has concerns that we think can be adequately addressed, that the subdivision would otherwise, meet the criteria and we can approve it, but there are issues that need to be addressed with the engineering department, then we can craft appropriate conditions on any approval
right.
that would prohibit the applicant from taking certain steps before they satisfy those requirements.
Right.
I mean, that's traditionally how we've done it, and maybe we need to be more strict with some
I
of
got
those
a
conditions.
question, ignorant question.
Okay.
So you're saying that this plan won't come back and have a site plan?
I'm saying any subdivision won't come back for a site plan.
Okay,
I mean,
so
they're
we
ju-
have to take care of I mean,
Right.
thank you.
Well, I mean, it's not a site plan is the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's a subdivision, so it's not.
Subdivision, but there's things on here that would concern me.
Excuse me,
That.
that's not correct. It has to go through a building permit plan.
It does not come back to the planning board.
Right, but
Don't
it
say
goes
that's
through
not
other
correct.
reviews in the city.
Yeah, well,
It's-
sometimes the other reviews don't catch what we can catch.
But it will not come back before the planning board. It
Thank
is
you.
not a site plan. There's no site plan review.
Thank you.
Okay.
I should know that, but
So I'm happy to continue the discussion if folks want to, but if we think like we've thoroughly vetted the issue, I'd be happy to.
Can I have
Take
one
a
more
vote.
comment about?
Take a vote.
Yeah.
I think we've adequately aired the issue.
You haven't, but, all right, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to,
Mr. Weber.
like to make a motion to, that the site, the
Subdivision.
subdivision plan is in order
It's
for us to take jurisdiction.
complete and ready for us to take jurisdiction?
Yes.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Weber that new business number 2 subdivision plan is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction. Is there a second to that motion?
Yes, I second the motion.
Seconded by Alderman Guinness. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ms. Robbins, so that's, what do we have here? 5-1, motion passes.
Ready? For the record, my name is Richard Maynard, professional engineer with Maynard Parkett, representing the applicant and property owner Crimson Properties LLC, with regard to property at 407 Main Dunstable Road. The property is also known as Sheet C Lot 65, contained in an existing single-family house and 30,894 square feet of land in the R9 zone. There are wetlands in the northeast upper right corner of the parcel, as shown on the plans, along with the required 40-foot buffer. The proposal is to subdivide the property into 2 lots of 17,228 square feet for the existing house and 13,667 square feet for the future building lot, which will have an address of 405 Main Dunstable Road. Drawing number 3 illustrates a possible house. The actual house to be built is unknown at this time. The purpose of drawing 3 is to indicate that a reasonably sized home, in this case I'm showing a 46 by 32, can be built without encroaching into the wetlands buffer, and that a proposed driveway would have the more than adequate site distance. Stormwater management will be handled by leaching catch basins, as said in my letter of certification to that effect. There are 2 waivers requested, one for overhead utilities, and the second is for sidewalk construction of 219 linear feet in lieu of a contribution of $10,950. With regard to what Mr. Rapucci talked about in the opening paragraph of Gene Walker's October 5th letter, every one of those issues there are building issues. The builder out there is doing all of these things. No matter what I design or whatever, who's ever doing the building, doing the grading, or whoever the contractor is causing the city these problems. I suspect, I don't know this, that the staff in engineering is shorthanded. They don't have enough field inspectors. I don't know that for sure, but that's what that is. The engineering staff is supposed to inspect these properties to see that they're done properly. And that's why they end up with all these problems here, because they're not being built per the design plans. Principally reviewed and approved by the engineering department, because every house needs a building permit plan, and the building permit plan indicates where the house is going, where the grades are, where the driveway's going, how it's gonna enter the street. That's the actual site plan, which is done as part of the building permit process. So, and you can't do that until you know what kind of house you're gonna put there, where your garage is going, garage right, garage left, front entry, side entry, things like that. So that's why the building permit process, and stipulation number 5, I think it is so important, because that, once you select a house, it clearly defines what's gonna happen on that lot. And that's the plan that everybody uses in engineering and building to make sure everything's done properly, so. Yes, engineering is frustrated because of these problems, but they're not because of the planning board's plans and whatever the planning board approves. They're more internal than they are with regard to this particular part of the process. Thank you.
Questions for Engineer Maynard? Mr. Leclerc?
Oh, I forgot one more thing, excuse me. Staff has asked me to consider proposing driveways along the common lot line for both houses, the existing one, which has a driveway that comes out in that area, and the new house. And I told them that's very likely we can do, and that's probably what we're gonna do, is put the driveways almost side by side along the common lot line. So I said that's our preference. I told them if they wanted to make that a stip, we could live with that too, so. That just came up tonight, we just had a little discussion, so.
Turnarounds?
And an on-site turnaround.
So the cars coming out of a driveway, given it's on a downhill gradient, the cars, it's posted at 30 mile an hour, but a lot of cars on that section of road go faster. It's so they can get out of their driveway more safely. If you back out of that on a hill, it can be somewhat
It's
dangerous.
essentially a bump out of like maybe 20 feet deep by 10 foot wide, so that you can come out of your garage, turn, and then go back and head out. That's just good practice. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Mr. Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Maynard, could you help me out? I
Sure.
want to learn as much about this as possible. Could you take us through the October 5th letter briefly, and just let us know why, whether or not these are planning issues in your opinion, and if you could just kind of address each one of them. For example, starting with the stormwater documents, which I believe you have addressed.
Item 1 refers to two different things. Stormwater documents are documents that are recorded at a registry that allow the city to come on the property to inspect the drainage improvements to make sure they're continue to working. And in this case, what they're going to inspect, if they choose to, is the leaching catch basin to make sure they're still working. Those documents are recorded at the registry, give the city the authority to come on the property to make that inspection and to enforce that down the road 5, 10, 20 years from now. The second part of this is the certification letter, which we all typically write for single-family homes, that the leaching catch basins shown are more than adequate to mitigate any drainage runoff increases. Those are typical standard things. They don't change subdivision to subdivision.
But excuse me for interrupting, but as I understand it, that letter, Ms. Walker allegedly,
I don't know if it's
Okay.
misplaced or what, but it's on
It's there.
hand. Staff will tell you that it's pretty much standard.
and it is required for planning, as a planning board document, is that
It's
correct?
provided to be submitted, it's not final approved until after the plan is approved, because it's a legal document that needs legal review, and that's the stormwater documents. The certification letter it's done, and there's no further review. Site distance, she's crossed that out, because she's go there. She's talking about the driveway in an existing house. The existing house, as I've shown on, some of you have the existing condition plans, they have about a 50 to 60 foot wide gravel area across their side yard that comes out to the street, and it qualifies as a driveway, but it's not legitimate. You can come out from that property anywhere along that right-hand side of their existing house. So she's concerned that situation gets fixed. And again, as I just explained to you, we're going to get a new driveway, and it's going to be hard surface. The city regulates the driveway as it enters the right-of-way. On private property, it can be anything, but it's very important that where the driveway enters the public right-of-way, that it be no more than 24 feet wide and be made of a hard surface, usually asphalt. And that's what she's pointing out to there. So, and that typically will be part of the building permit plan.
As opposed, and what you're saying is it's not required to be provided,
I illustrated it on there to give you a typical idea how it might go, but that driveway could move 20, 30, 40 feet.
Understood.
Because depending on what you select for a house, especially if you go from a garage on the left or the garage on the right, or a garage front-facing, drive out, or a garage side entry, all these things. The idea on these plans is to demonstrate that there's a place to adequately provide a driveway. If I designed a lot that absolutely didn't have any place for a safe site distance driveway, then you can't approve the plan. But I've demonstrated this, and that's why that's illustrated on there, that there is at least one spot where you can have a safe driveway. There's multiple places here, but that's the principle behind that idea. 4, limits of roadway restoration must be shown, and roadway patches. That has to do with when you take your utilities and cut into the pavement of the road. Again, until we know the house, I don't know exactly where those are going, but she wants a typical roadway patch shown as part of the details, which they won't issue a sewer connection permit or anything like that until you do that anyway, so. That's, again, depends on what kind of house you're selecting.
But is that something that we as the planning board would need to have in front of us, documents that are
I have
not?
no comments on that. You have no knowledge of it, you have no expertise in deciding whether the patch is proper or not. It's purely an engineering matter.
All right, so just so that I understand from what you're saying is that item number 4 is superfluous to our consideration tonight.
Yes, it's a concern, and she puts it on record, but it's not necessarily a concern for the board.
Thank you.
It's a concern for the city, not. Sidewalks along the frontage are required. Well, we have a waiver request, so that's not a, number 6 is just advising that the sewer pipe is asbestos cement, and there are special requirements to be paid attention to when you play with asbestos, so. And that's more for the construction contractor down the road. And those are strict rules. 7 is crossed out. 8 is what I've been talking all along. That's the building permit plan that needs to design this. Proper construction materials must be submitted. She's talking about pipe materials and things like that on the sewer connection. And then number 10 is kind of a repeat. She wants a full set of construction plans, which is the building permit plan that conforms to what you folks are approving tonight for a subdivision, a lot configuration. So, that's pretty much what it is.
Thank you.
Mr. Capucci?
Yeah, what was the date of the application you submitted, do you know? That's the date of the plan, is that the date of the application?
I'm not sure.
I didn't bring that with me, maybe Linda could tell you.
Linda will tell us.
It was, we received it on August 24th.
Okay, and the stipulation request on number 5 that you referenced, was that some?
Staff report number 5?
Yeah, the sidewalk along the frontage are required, was she, with the letter of October 5th, number 5 says sidewalks along the frontage are required, and you said you've handled that with the stipulation request,
With a waiver request.
with a waiver request.
Yes.
Was that waiver request made at the same time of the application?
Yes.
Okay, so that was also made on August 24th. Thanks.
He did.
Linda's nodding her head, yes.
Yes, he did.
She's usually not that quiet.
Mr. Weber?
Yes. You show a proposed driveway for the proposed house. Will there be another driveway for the existing house?
Yes. It'll be in the same area along the common lot line where that wide open gravel driveway area is, but until I do the grading for my new house, I can't fit that other driveway because there's a drop-off in there of 4 to 5 feet.
Yeah.
So they have to be worked in unison, and I agree with staff that I'd put them near, as close to side by side as I could, so they essentially be both coming out near the same point onto the road.
Okay. And you already said that you were gonna do a turnaround or something?
Yes, a bump out for the turnaround,
Yeah.
yes, on-site bump out, yeah.
Now, are there gonna be any new, back up, it shows here the existing retaining wall, is all of it gonna be removed, completely, all of it?
I have to, they have to be graded out, and if we have to build new ones, we do, but I think we can just grade them out so that they're on 2 different levels. That wall is 3 to 4 feet high, it's not a big dime wall.
No, I was
so-
there, I went there.
Yeah, and it's,
It's been
and
terrible
it's
condition.
it's in the wrong location anyway, it's right along where we're gonna propose the common lot line anyway.
Right,
And the new driveway for that house is probably gonna come right in that general area too, so. We assume nothing with regard to, except that the wall's going. If we have to do a new one, we'll do it, but I don't think so. I think there's enough that we can grade it, so that we can have side-by-side driveways without any retaining walls.
what's the step down from the existing house to the proposed house? What will be this? from
I
one,
mean, elevation-wise?
yeah,
for the first
elevation,
floor?
grading, it's really different, a big difference right now.
Yeah, it's good, well. I have to look at the plan.
Just take a microphone with you when you're
Talk there.
It's hard to read.
The existing house has a grade of essentially 215 at the house. The new house has a grade on the elevation essentially around 208, 209. So ground at the foundation would be approximately 6 feet difference. However, the new house will be lifted up 4 to 5 feet, and there'll be front steps and things like that. So that's typically how that's done.
Thank you. You're gonna have a silt fence put in place.
Yes, that's on the plan, that has to be there.
Is that,
Drawing number 3 shows it all along the edge of the wetlands buffer.
right?
That's
And
a requirement.
right, and the problem, a lot of times, you put it on your plans, and the contractor really doesn't put it to that plan, and that exact, they do it as they see fit, and it's not, it's engineered to this, and that's submitted to it, but it's never
Is it,
done correctly. That's what the problem is a lot of times with the city finding, it's not done correctly.
understood. There's 2 things. 1, they don't put it in the right place, and 2, they don't maintain it. Maintaining it is just about as important. Once I show it on a plan, it's up to the city engineer's office to enforce that, or the building department to enforce that. I can't go out and tell the contractors what to do. I don't have that authority. But under the building permit, the city does through their inspectors, whether they be engineering inspectors or engineering department inspectors or building department inspectors. And there are clear rules and regs on this, and I can show the location of the plan, and I can give them all the erosion control details. There's a whole sheet of what you're supposed to do. And every time it says there, as directed by the engineer. So, you know, once this is approved, it's out of my hands. And once the building permits, it's pretty much out of my hands in that regard. So there's nothing I can do to that. The city controls that through their bonding process, through their inspection process, and things like, and their other permit processes, so.
Right, the one.
And
Are
that's
you-
what she's complaining about, that they don't have staff to
Right,
do this, and I don't know
okay. Are you gonna be having an engineer draw this up and stamped it?
for sure. Yes, it always gets done under my direction
Okay.
and my stamp.
Okay, one of the things that I've done in the past is put a stipulation that when it is complete, that the applicant's engineer or applicant provides a third party to inspect what was done, what is done, and what is
Who's
there
down in the
now.
field? You know, we don't have the authority to do that.
We do,
Huh?
we do.
As a city?
Yes, we have, as a planning board, we have the
We
right
cannot
to
act
do
as
that.
building inspectors.
No, but we can have an engineer stamp it that it is done according to plans. We can do that.
I don't think so.
I know, so I talked to legal.
Yeah, I know, but that's, you
Okay.
didn't, well, I'm not sure what you're telling them. That has to do with driveways and things like that, yes. But with
Any
regard to the
engineering-
building inspection, no.
Any engineering thing that's done on this plan can
What
be,
is the design of a building?
it's what's put on the,
Architectural or engineering?
both.
No, I don't.
You
Please
have
get
your
it.
opinion, I have
If
mine.
legal tells you you can do it, I want to see that in writing, and I want to see where the authority is
Okay,
for the city to delegate
okay,
their responsibilities.
all right, thank you.
But if that ends up being it, fine.
Okay.
Other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, well,
Mr. Clare?
so, Mr. Maynard, you've read all these comments from Ms. Walker on the October 5th letter that we've been talking about. And like, in your professional opinion, are any of these comments, once incorporated, gonna change or gonna cause an adverse impact on the current way that you've drawn that subdivision
I have no
plan?
problem with all the whether they call them stipulations, suggestions, or whatever. They're all straightforward. I don't have any problem with any of them.
And you don't
They're not gonna change the plan.
You don't think they're gonna cause the adjustment of the lot line to
Never.
get more distance
That's why
between?
I showed you that typical box.
Yeah, I have some specific things, though, just hear me out.
If somebody wants a house bigger than that, forget it, go buy someplace else.
Right, so there's limitations on that lot in terms of the size of the house because of the
For sure,
wetlands.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't encroach in the setback of the wetlands, the buffer, rather.
Right. But
So-
the proposed or illustrated house that you have on the lot, you believe meets all of the requirements?
Yes, it's a very reasonable size house I've shown in there, 46 by 32. If you can't, somebody can't find a house layout that fits in that box, this is not the lot for them. So, we're looking for houses in the 400,000 range. We're not looking for 7,000, 8,000 square foot houses, so
Okay.
it's not gonna change the layout. If for some reason, somebody comes, and I don't have any room on that plan, but anyway, if for some reason somebody comes and says, I want a bigger house, and I tell them it won't fit on the lot, I'd be back here asking for a lot line adjustment. But that doesn't happen too often.
No, I think you can see our concern. We don't want to approve plans that require somebody to come back, so we have to
I
keep
understand, that's why
approving it
I
like
illustrated
5
a house,
times in a row,
so
so.
people are assured that
Right, and
this layout works, can be made to work.
Thanks.
Other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to this plan? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Staff, anything to add?
I just wanted to remind the board, if they're going to approve the plan, stipulation number 5, Gene Walker's letter dated October 5th. The applicant has also offered to do the driveways with turnarounds, if we could make that as a stipulation. And one thing I just wanted to ask the applicant if they'd be willing to work with staff to just put some wetland buffer markers on the property. Wetland marker buffers. It is flagged, but just some buffers, just so that they know.
Yeah,
If
the
you work
ordinance
with
requires
staff.
that.
Is that
Yeah.
fine?
Legitimate stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you just say that for the microphone, just?
The wetlands are flagged, but she's asking for the wetland buffer to be staked out with tall stakes, and that's a fair stipulation. So that everybody knows that they need to know what it is anyway to put their erosion control along that buffer, so, but that's a reasonable stipulation.
It's an actual buffer marker, done it with the Conservation Commission marker. It's required by ordinance.
Yeah.
It's a little disc.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Randy said.
yeah, Randy's done it before.
Yeah.
It's a typical requirement of,
We haven't used those for years, but I hope we got some.
Oh,
We-
I
we
have
do.
plenty,
we have plenty.
10.
Oh, okay, send me over 10 of those. We'll pay for them.
Okay.
I just have one more question for staff.
Certainly.
The $10,950 amount being proposed for the sidewalk waiver,
It's the entire frontage of both lots.
that's consistent with
It is.
typical numbers. Okay.
So $50 a linear foot
linear
for the
foot.
entire frontage.
Okay.
Mr. Robbins?
May I ask staff one question?
Sure.
It seems as though there's a little bit of, at least in my mind, confusion in the letter from Gene Walker, that some of the comments are appropriate for the planning department and planning board, and some of them concern other things that are not necessarily part of this particular deliberation. Looking at staff recommendation number 5, prior to the chair signing the plan, all comments in the memo from Gene Walker dated, if we put in 10/5/17, does that raise any kind of a potential conflict if we say all comments as opposed to comments that pertain to the planning approval process? I don't want to raise an issue, I'm just throwing that out there, because we're talking now about comments in a letter that may not have anything to do with the planning board approval process. And I just want to make sure there are no conflicts down the line.
Well, I mean, I think it's something that, you know, we can all work together to try to address these. The reason why I had put that on here was I hadn't received her comments when the staff report went out. I mean, it's typically we do it prior to building permit. That is normally what we do. But it's just because I had not gotten her comment yet, and I just wanted to make sure I had some discussion with her, that her concerns were all addressed. So I do think it's something that we can all work out. It shouldn't be an issue.
If staff can work it out, I'm very comfortable with that. Thank you.
Just a quick note on my side, though. I mean, I feel like people are getting confused to some extent that the engineering department's review is, it doesn't have to be just the stuff that pertains to the planning department. It could be anything it wants to be. We're just using this as information into our decision-making process. If she wants to put that the driveway needs to be green, I don't have an issue with that. I don't care. That's not a planning thing, but I don't see any reason why the engineering department can't put whatever they want in these letters. It's up to us to decide whether it's pertinent to planning or not. So, I mean, I don't think you have to take each of these comments. These are comments between the engineering department and the applicant. They're not between the planning board and the applicant. You know what I mean?
I hear
Some
you.
of
Thank
these
you.
are applicable, some are not. It doesn't, I don't think that matters. The ones that we believe matter are the ones that we should be able to care about. That's the only thing I'm saying, so.
I'd like to speak to that, but in the
Yeah.
public meeting.
Okay,
Maybe you-
so-
When we get to our meeting,
Do we have any more questions to the applicant?
No.
Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. This concludes the hearing on this application. We'll now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. Mr. Rapucci.
Yeah, along the lines of what we're talking about this letter, you know, I don't want to put words into anybody's mouth, whether it's Mr. Robbins or anybody else, but I don't really see it the way you're saying it, that the city engineer can put whatever they want in the letter. I'm not an engineer, okay? So I take the city engineer's letter very seriously, and I read it, like I think Mr. Robbins read it, and looks at the concerns that get raised in the letter, and it's tying us up, right? You have the benefit of being an engineer, so you know the answers to the questions, but I don't. So when I look at this, I tell you, this letter really bothers me, and the thing that bothers me the most about it is that this is the second time that this applicant has testified that he submitted the stormwater, was it the stormwater? That he submitted everything that's required at the time of application to both the planning department and the engineering department. That was done on August 24th, that's 41 days ago. The planning department acknowledges that they received that stuff, like the applicant says. But today, the engineering department sends us a letter saying they haven't gotten it, 41 days later. They send a letter to the applicant on October 2nd, and on September 29th, the applicant answers on October 2nd, and today, again, the engineering department is saying they never got that, which I can't imagine how that's possible, and they're including the sidewalk along the frontages are required statement, which clearly was handled by the waiver request, August 24th. What does that tell me? I mean, that tells me they're not reading this thing. They're not even looking at it, because if they were, there's no way that would be in there. So, one time, okay, but now this is the second time where an applicant says they sent it to the engineering department. The engineering department takes the time to send us a letter saying they didn't receive something that we know they did. That's a problem for me. You know, if I get a letter from the engineering department, I want it to be accurate. If the engineering department says something like, I have this problem with this application, I want to take that for what it's worth. I don't want to be, you know, I wash people's clothes for a living. I don't want to be determining if the city engineer has it right. I want to be able to believe they do. But this is telling me clearly they don't. And I don't know. I think it's a big problem. I think it's kind of, now when I read the letter from them, I look at it like, well, I don't know what the hell they're saying. I don't know how accurate it is. I don't know when the last time they looked at it. So I just want to make that point where, yes, they can put in whatever they want, but if they send me a letter saying something's a problem that they should, over a month ago, know is not a problem, I'd like to address that with them. And when they say the city is experiencing ongoing problems with development of new lots and highlight the problems with drainage and all that, I actually want them to articulate where those problems are. I want them, when they say that to the planning board, I want them to say, this location, this application, this engineer, this builder is not conforming to what the planning board is authorizing them to do. Or don't say it. Because otherwise, to me, it's just innuendo, and I'm gonna leave it alone now, but I do think it's important that they tell us the accurate stuff. Again, we're like an hour into an application talking about a lot of stuff that just really shouldn't be before us, and I think it's before us because of this letter. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
I mean, I think, I don't disagree with you in terms of it's important that the letter from the engineering department be accurate. And, you know, part of the challenge is that we're often, you know, we're getting these letters, you know, for example, this one, we're getting this letter tonight. So staff's just having a chance to review it. We're just having a chance to review it. You know, we don't have the opportunity to ask the engineering staff, you know, about their thinking on this. And I think, you know, traditionally, and I agree with you again that, you know, some of these issues look like they should have just been addressed in terms of, and I don't know what the issue is in terms of the submitting the documents and not being received by planning department, but not by engineering. But traditionally, because of some of the reasons you've raised, we've said, okay, as long as, you know, the issues that are being raised in, you know, the comments from the engineering department don't seem, you know, out of bounds, we're going to agree to defer to the engineering department because we don't have the opportunity or, that, you know, for most of us, the knowledge, you know, to follow up on these specific issues. So we're going to defer, and so we're going to put it in as a stipulation to the plan. Now, as a practical matter, I think, you know, some of these issues, you know, no stormwater documents were received by this office, no certification letter was provided. Well, it seems to me that if we make it a condition that issue needs to be addressed, and they have those documents, you know, no harm, no foul. And I would say that the applicant did state expressly that, you know, he doesn't have any concerns in terms of, you know, conforming to the issues addressed in this letter. So, you know, if he was saying, you know, I've got a real problem with item number one, then I think we'd have to confront that more directly and then decide, you know, how we were going to handle that. But in this particular case, I think it's reasonable to say we're going to include a condition with respect to this letter. I think the issue you're raising is a bigger issue, and it may be that we need to have, you know, some sort of dialogue with the engineering department, you know, as to cases more generally, and you know, and how these issues are handled, and you know, what the communication flow is between the applicant and the engineering department, and then what the communications resulting from the engineering department to the planning board. But I think that's a bigger issue.
I agree. I just wanted to vent that I
Yep.
feel like we
No,
wasted a lot of time on issues that weren't
Right.
really issues.
Yeah.
That's all.
I don't disagree. Mr. Weber?
Yes, question for staff, to bring up like what Jerry was talking about and what the applicant was talking about. The building department doesn't have an engineering to go out and inspect the silt fences, screening that's gonna be required. They don't have that, is that correct? They don't have the building department that does the inspections doesn't typically go out and inspect the silt fences that are in place.
Well, actually, stipulation number 8 has to do with the pre-construction meeting.
Linda, could you just talk a little louder? I can't hear you.
Hold the mic up.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Stipulation number 8 has to do with the pre-construction meeting, and that's something that planning staff goes out and does. And at that time, we make sure that the silt fence is in place at that time.
Correctly, engineering correctly, and it's installed correctly.
Oh, well, we do look at it. I mean, of course, what happens 4 months from now, to be honest, I don't know. But when we do go out there and do our pre-construction meeting, we do look at that and make sure that it is in place.
Now, when we're talking about, what I saw here is there's fabric gonna go down to protect the landscaping. And is that what you're looking at?
Correct, to make sure that there's nothing going, particularly because it's wetlands. And I also have staff to Conservation Commission. He's also going to go out with me and look at that as well. But yeah, we do make sure that that is in place.
Does, if the applicant needs to, during construction, they see that they need a retaining wall, the engineer comes and stamps the plan that he's gonna do it, but the contractor who puts it in there, who's gonna check that contractor is the building department going to look at the retaining wall and to see that it's done properly?
I believe if it's over 4 feet, you need to get a permit for the retaining wall. And then, yes, they would go out and inspect it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions, before we consider a motion?
Well, there was the issue that, I don't know if you want to discuss it before a motion, that you were talking about the engineering review. I don't know if you want to talk about that in the public meeting before we get to a motion, so I just thought I'd remind you.
Right, and they answered my question, the staff answered it, that if there's a retaining wall of a certain height that has to be permitted.
So that was
That was
behind what you were asking?
Yes, that's
Gotcha.
behind.
Okay.
As far as the driveways and stuff like that, on private roads that have a lot of housing on it that we've come in, the city does not look at those, and that's typically where the problem arises, so that's not here.
Gotcha. I just wanted to remind you.
Yeah.
All set.
And then just in terms of information for the maker of the motion, I think we talked about, obviously, number 5, we know that's October 5th. And then we talked about 2 additional stipulations, one relating to, applicant working with staff to place the driveways along the common lot line and also to provide for turnarounds. And then another stipulation regarding flagging, the posts with the identifiers, the Conservation Commission identifiers for the wetland buffer. So.
Okay.
Mr. Claire?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion, with new business number 2 subdivision plan. Owner applicant Crimson Properties LLC, location 407 Main Dunstable Road. I'd like to make the motion that this subdivision plan does meet the requirements outlined in 190-138G, that there be 11 stipulations, the first 2 being waivers. The first waiver, Section 190-221 for underground utilities, be read as is granted and will not be contrary. The second waiver for Section 190-212A1 for sidewalks be read as is granted and will not be contrary, and understood as written that the applicant will make a contribution in the amount of $10,950. With regard to the remaining stipulations, they be as written in the staff report, with the exception of stipulation number 5, the date of the letter from Gene Walker be dated 5 October of 2017. And then 2 additional stipulations to make up the 11. Number 10 be that the driveways on both sites be required to be constructed with on-site turnaround capability, and the 2 driveways be located adjacent to the common lot line as much as possible. And stipulation number 11, that the wetland buffer, all wetland buffers on the sites be staked with city-approved markers.
Motion by Mr. Leclerc is to approve new business number 2, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in Site Plan NRO Section 190-138G, with 11 stipulations, the first 2 being waiver requests, reading is granted, will not be contrary. 5 as amended by the maker of the motion, and 10 and 11 as added by the maker of the motion. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, new business site plans, case number 3, CPC Investments LLC owner, application and acceptance of proposed site plan to convert an existing 2-family into a 3-family and to construct an additional 5-unit multifamily building. Property is located at 6264 Lake Street, sheet 101-60, zoned urban residence, and this is located in Ward 6. As to new business case number 3, I have a motion. This application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Weber. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Alderman McGinnis. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
All set, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead whenever you're ready.
For the record, my name is Richard Maynard, professional engineer with Maynard Parkett Engineering of Nashua, representing the property owners and applicant CPC Investments, LLC. The property of concern is an existing older duplex located at 62-64 Lake Street in the RC multifamily zone. The property is also known as Lot 60, Sheet 101, and it contains 23,590 square feet of land. In March of 2017, the project received ZBA approval for an 8-unit multifamily building. Front duplex will be converted from 2 to 3 units, and 5 new units with 2 garages under will be built to the rear. This is somewhat similar to the multifamily building on the adjacent lot at 60 Lake Street that was approved and built in the 2005-2006 period. Total parking for the project, the 8-unit project will be 18 units. There's a mistake on the plan. It says 16, it'll be corrected to 18. 10 in garages under and 8 in 4 surface location, parking spot location. The existing 9-foot driveway along the easterly or left side, it will be expanded to 22 feet per the request of the fire department. Along the westerly or right side is an existing driveway easement and shared driveway to the rear. The existing garage access by this driveway will be demolished. Drainage for the project will be handled by 2 leach and catch basins at either end of the proposed 5-unit portion of this building. 1 waiver for overhead utilities has been requested. Thank you.
So, again, we have 2 letters from the engineering department, but one dated this evening, which sounds like it addresses some of the same issues. And points 1 and 2 in particular, point 2 in particular raises concerns about the grading and whether it's possible to evaluate the drainage impacts. So I'm wondering if you could address that, please.
I neglected to put up the rendering of the project, the existing duplex in the front and the 5 units to the rear. With regard to grading, this site, those of you that had the opportunity to visit it, it's almost dead flat. There's hardly any slope to it at all. So what has been provided on drawing number 3 is a bunch of existing elevations of the grades. And all, she's not used to getting, I usually see contours, but there's no contours to be done because contours is 2 feet of elevation difference between contours. And this particular thing, we only can give them spot grades, but throughout you see all these numbers here on drawing number 3. Those are all existing grades on the particular site, so there is grading shown. Now, the next thing to remember is we're not changing the grades here. This is a nice level site. It's with an existing driveway that goes around to the rear and things like that. Pretty much the site is going to remain the same. The only spots that we're particularly concerned is over here where there's a proposed new grade, just to indicate that the grade has to go down here to this leaching basin from 167.8 down to a leaching basin at 167.1, so the flows will go that way. And that's what I call them flow arrows or squiggly arrows, are indicating how the drainage goes. Beyond that, there's no change in the grades, so there is no grading per se to be shown. Are we okay?
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying there's not sufficient difference in the grade to show contour lines?
You definitely can't do contours. You have to do spot elevations because they're all less than a foot of difference in elevation, so. You know, and there's one contour through this whole site that goes like this, but that doesn't do anything for anybody.
And I know Mr. Rapucci has a question.
No,
Just
I'm sorry.
one other thing. With respect to the sewer service,
Yes.
the comment is that the proposed, the
Yep.
sewer services proposed wouldn't be allowed as shown, so I just,
No, that's not written right. I wasn't aware that there's an ordinance that says you only can have one sewer service per lot. I'm told that's the case. Now, I have done numerous projects with multiple sewer services, especially when you do townhouse condos and each one has their own sewer service, but that's neither here nor in this regard. What Engineer Walker, without quite saying it, would like us to do is there's an existing sewer line right over in this location going like this. She would like us to tap that line there and run it back here like that, so that we only have one sewer connection out into the street, and we'd have that on site, which is fine. It saves a little bit of money about opening the street up. I just thought the reg was you couldn't double up on sewer connections, but I don't care that either way. Engineering-wise, this is just as reasonable.
okay. Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah. So getting back to the number, the second point that she made that you spoke to, just so that I understand.
Is that the one about elevations?
Yeah.
Okay.
Her letter says, combined with bullet number 1 above, this makes it impossible to adequately evaluate the site for drainage impacts. While it is acknowledged that a stormwater management analysis was provided without grading details, parentheses, not spot elevations, there is no way to assure that the flows will be directed properly. So my question is she right in saying that, but you're saying you can't provide the grading?
No,
Or
it's in
is that
between.
incorrect?
It's not incorrect. She wants more information, more squiggly arrows telling me I'm pushing drainage this way, pushing that way. Literally, that's what it is.
Right.
She wants it crystal clear which way the drainage is going.
Can you do that?
Yes, and I will do that,
When?
on whatever stipulation is that I have to satisfy her letter.
Okay, thank you.
You know, and all it is a clarification of where the drainage is going, because we have a full drainage report. This is not just a certification letter from me. And if you look carefully, you can tell where it's going, but takes a little bit of an effort.
Okay. That's all I have to ask you, thanks.
All right?
Any questions for the applicant? Looks like we're all set for the moment.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in his opposition or concern to this plan? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Staff have anything to add?
The only thing I would add is that to change on stipulation number 4, the date to October 5th. I decided to do it.
You mean stipulation number 5?
Yes, yes.
Wait.
It's on the new one.
Oh,
On the
sorry,
new-
I'm looking at the old
If you
one.
look at the amended staff
Sorry.
report, it's stipulation number 4.
I apologize.
I actually have one question for the applicant.
Okay, sorry, Engineer Maynard, one more question for Mr. Leclerc.
Yeah.
Yes.
Looking at the waiver for the underground utilities, can you explain a little bit? I mean, I understand the existing house has overhead and it's coming off the street overhead. But the units that are being constructed behind the existing house, are you proposing to run like an overhead lateral down the driveway or something? Or are you going through the
They're going through
existing
the
house?
house.
So it'll be inside the house?
Right.
You're not running any more overhead than what is there now?
That's my understanding. You
Okay.
know, we don't always get the final answer
Yeah.
from public service until you have building plans, but
Yeah.
we're not running a separate overhead line down the driveway, no.
Yeah, well, that's my concern, right? Because I've seen
If we were, we'd
plans
have to have
here,
some utility poles in there, and
Right.
we don't plan on doing that.
right, and we've seen some issues with driveways obviously with primaries running
Yeah.
above them, with people hitting them and stuff. So you don't see any issue with the stipulation if I put one on there that says that the primary service is gonna go into the overhead to the existing house, but there'll be no more overhead services on the lot?
No more overhead services beyond the existing duplex.
Exactly.
Is what I would like the
So
STIP to
if
say.
if they need to go back and refeed these beyond, they're gonna have to go
If I have a
underground.
problem, they're gonna end up stuck underground,
Right.
because I don't have room to have utility poles in there. It adds too many conflicts.
Yeah, I'm good. I know what to do.
And I have no problem with that. That's the plan anyway.
Okay,
I have a question for staff.
question for staff, okay?
Yeah. On the other applicant, number 4 was different than this one. Why didn't you do prior to chair signing compared to this one?
On the other one, I did it prior to the chair signing because it was a subdivision and it's gonna get recorded, and I just wanted to make sure that everything got tied up before it got recorded. Whereas this one, it's a site plan, it doesn't get recorded, and that's why I put it
Okay.
prior to building permit.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, so we're good, everybody good closing the hearing?
Yeah.
This concludes the hearing on this application. We'll now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. Questions, comments?
I just have one comment. When I was out there, the unit that's, this is kind of like, looks like a real congested type of thing. But seeing the one that's there and existing, it's been there for a long time, it's in very neat, very clean place. It's not all jumbled mess.
Mr. Ocucci?
Yeah, I would just like your opinion on the questions about the spot elevations, because I know that Mr. Maynard kind of interpolated what the city engineer was saying, but I don't think that's what the city engineer said in the letter. She said in the letter that there's no way to know the flows will be directed properly without grading details. And what I understood Mr. Maynard to say was, well, you can with spot elevations, but we just need to do more of them. And so I'm wondering, do you agree that that's right? Or do you agree that even if the applicant does more spot elevations to give more detail where the water's going to go, will that be adequate? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine. You can show the drainage in multiple drafting ways.
Gotcha. So you agree
So,
that that's
I
gonna
mean,
cover it?
In short, he's gonna have to do it to the level of detail that the engineer
Satisfied.
is satisfied by.
Right.
And I don't know what level that's gonna be, but it could be 150 spot elevations, or it could be another 10. I'm not sure I care, as
Okay.
long as.
Yeah, they just want to
happy
see
with it.
that the runoff from the pavement is going to go to the drain.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for, is that
Sure.
that's where it's going to go.
Right.
And,
But if you were to draw a contour line on there, you just have one line going through the whole drawing.
yeah,
That's all it would be.
and typically on parking lots and stuff like that, they show elevations, you know, so that it shows that it's flowing to the drain. That's what they're
Sure.
looking for.
Okay.
So I'm okay with that. Okay.
Mr. Leclerc?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion in new business number 3, owner CPC Investment LLC, location 62 and 64 Lake Street. I'd like to make the motion that this plan does meet the requirements outlined in NRO 190-146D, and that there be 9 stipulations, the first being the waiver of NRO section 190-221C, which requires all utilities be placed underground, that be granted and will not be contrary to the spirit and intent for only the primary lateral from the main street to the existing building. Any further primary electric service work would need to be underground. And then with number 4, that the letter from Gene Walker be dated October 5th, 2017.
Motion by Mr. Leclerc is to approve new business number 3, site plan, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D. With a total of 9 stipulations, the first being a waiver request reading is granted, will not be contrary, with the additional clarification provided by Mr. Leclerc as to the extent of the waiver. Number 4 being corrected to read October 5th, 2017, and the remaining stipulations as written in the staff report. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. New business site plans, case number 4. This case has been postponed until the December 7th, 2017 meeting. Other business, case number 1. Review of tentative agenda to determine proposals of regional impact. Has anyone had a chance to review?
Yeah.
Mr. Leclerc?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that there are no proposals of regional impact on the current tentative agenda.
Motion by Mr. Leclerc is that, having reviewed the tentative agenda, there are no proposals of regional impact. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Good night.
Good night.
Other business, case number 2, referral from the Board of Aldermen on proposed R-17-129 for the city to research the feasibility of purchasing the former Daniel Webster College property located at 20 University Drive. And seems pretty straightforward to me, but I don't know, Roger, Linda, do you have anything to add?
I put in your packet the minutes of the meeting, so you'd have, and there was a memo in the back. The committee recommended indefinite postponement of this, and your recommendation will be going next week to the full Board of Aldermen. And any proposals for that auction would have to be in a week later, which makes it very difficult to do anything. So I think if the board's, you have a choice, whatever you want to recommend, whether it's unfavorable or just go along with the Aldermanic Planning and Economic Development Committee's recommendation, you could do that as well. I think typically the board just recommends one way or another. I think that the timing constraints here are very difficult as far as turning it around. Auctions, the end of this, I think it's the 24th of October in the memo from.
Yeah, bids have to be in by the 17th.
Yeah, and so it's like from the 10th, which when the alderman would make a decision to.
It's not a lot of time to do
Yeah,
research.
there's no, and you want to do due diligence and really expend some time looking at those buildings. There's numerous buildings, and they've been, some have environmental issues that would need to be clearly understood before we made a binding arrangement.
Right. So, again, as Roger said, typically we would just make an up or down, either a favorable or unfavorable recommendation. I mean, in one sense, you know, the proposal is pretty limited. It's study the feasibility. So that would be the extent of the recommendation. Do we agree that the city should study the feasibility of it? But as we just were discussing, I mean, I think there's a legitimate question as to whether the city could reasonably, within this really tight time frame, adequately study the feasibility. So, I mean, I guess as an abstract matter, I think it makes sense. Yes, the city should study the feasibility of purchasing the property. So, I mean, I would be inclined to say a favorable recommendation, but maybe with the comment that we make this recommendation with the understanding that, as a practical matter, you know, there may not be sufficient time to actually study the issue. I don't know, other thoughts?
How old is the property? I mean, the buildings and everything.
They're all different ages and
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
But again, I mean, the proposal is not,
It's not to
should
do
the
it,
city
yeah.
buy it? It's should the city study whether or not it's feasible to buy it?
It's always good to study before you buy.
Is that, well, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
is that cost money? Do you hire an outside person to do that feasibility study? Does the city, who does that?
I believe the document authorizes the Economic Development Director to undertake the study.
Where does it say?
There's no additional funds contemplated by this resolution.
Yeah. There's somewhere here where it says, oh yeah, the Office of Economic Development shall conduct this feasibility study, utilizing appropriate city staff, which may include assessing, community development, code enforcement, and information technology. So it'd all be in-house.
Yeah.
No funds expended to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fiscal note on the back here.
Yeah.
I believe there was a companion piece of legislation as well, or there was discussion about bonding as well. It was all tied into one of other resolutions, and that never went forward on this, so there wouldn't be any money logistically to buy DWC if even, you know, the auction is on the 24th of October. And the proposals have to be to the auction people by the 17th of October.
Can I just ask a process question? I mean, let's assume that we were to offer a favorable recommendation and the Board of Aldermen go forward and say, okay, we're gonna go ahead and study this. And let's say that they determined it was worthwhile for the city to make an offer. Would that then come back before the planning board for another recommendation on that proposal to make the offer?
I'm not sure how it could get back to this board in sufficient time to do that
Right, that's what
logistically.
I'm wondering, yeah, I mean.
Yeah,
But
no.
would they technically be required to submit it to the planning board for a recommendation on the proposal to buy?
The
acquisition, yes.
Okay.
I don't see any reason why you can't say favorable if they want to try it.
Yeah.
That's the point, you know, I mean, the timing is rough, but I don't know.
Yeah, again, that's what I mean,
Turn
you know,
it down.
of this, in terms of the substance of the,
Yeah,
of
I
the,
think it's
you know,
fine.
I don't know why we would
Yeah,
say unfavorable, so.
I mean, unless anybody has any other
Does anybody have any?
concerns,
Well,
I'll make them.
I don't have an opinion I'd try to sway anybody on.
Hmm.
I don't think I'd vote for this, just because it's gonna, I think, even if we articulate that it's not the case, I don't wanna put forward a suggestion that I think it's a good idea to start to look at this 12 days before the auction and come to a decision on whether or not the city should buy it. That auction has been scheduled for a while, and the idea that that property was going to be put on auction was out there for a long time. If serious-minded people were interested in the property, it seems to me that should have been something that was started months ago. So, if somebody translates the planning board approved the idea of doing a feasibility study into the planning board thinks this might be a good idea, I don't want to touch that. I'd rather just, I look at it like 12 days is not enough time to do it in a reasonable way, and because of that, not enough time, I don't think it's a good idea. That, but like I say, I'm not trying to sway anybody. I don't think it's gonna harm us to do it the way you're saying
Yeah,
it.
that's a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's one way of looking at it.
I mean, we can okay it with a statement that 12 days is just really not sufficient.
I think you just decide whether you make it positive or,
Yeah.
you know, or not.
That's
and
fine.
move on.
And I, you know, honestly,
Let's just
I
put it
can,
up there. I'll make it,
I think both positions are reasonable, so
Yeah.
I'm going,
Yeah.
happy to,
You could just say no comments, too.
no comment. Fine, I mean, Mr. Claire, if you want to make a motion, then we can,
well, how many people don't think it's a good idea?
I think it's a good idea with comments, so that they understand where we're coming from, that we're supposed to actually come back, they're supposed to come back to us again for approval, and there's just not enough time. So they need to do this.
Actually, we have an alderman here, maybe. he can shed some-
He was gone for a while.
I said, we have an alderman.
What you said.
Well, if I may,
Yes.
please.
yeah, I don't think you need to qualify it with the, look, there's only 12 days. I think you're going too far there. I mean, you could come up with a miracle, right? Get feasibility study done in 6 days, I don't know. But is that really where we belong? I would just approve it on its merits.
I don't have an issue.
I see a point that
Yeah.
certainly Ed's making, but, yeah.
Oh, Jerry made them.
Well, Jerry made that point, yeah.
All right.
It's good, but I just wonder if it's necessary.
Well, they're supposed to come back. They were saying that they're supposed to
Right,
come
well, I
back.
mean, that's where we
And
get
there's
the,
not gonna be enough time.
Well, yeah,
Or
but
the-
we're getting ahead of ourselves there, I think.
it depends.
Well,
There could be like.
Could
all
I just
kinds
ask
of
you a quick
people-
question? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this.
Yeah.
But if the city is involved in doing the feasibility study, does that mean that resources in the city from whatever departments they're working for are gonna have to drop everything they're doing and dedicate days of their time to put this together? Or is that not relevant?
I don't think it's relevant, I don't think that's what happens. They hire somebody.
Well, they said they're gonna do it in-house.
Oh, they said they're gonna do it in-house?
Yeah, they said there's no money associated to it,
You
at least
know,
that's
it's
what.
not, I can tell you, I don't think there's a big push for this
Right.
from the Board of Aldermen. You know, and I know Mark Cookson's the one that introduced this original legislation, and he's backed off of that, so I don't think they're gonna put a lot of
think, Dave?
resources into
Well,
it.
if the motion by Alderman McCarthy for indefinite postponement carried,
Yeah.
is this moot at the moment?
It is.
So I
Indefinite
would.
postponement means it never comes up again, right?
Well, it could, but it would have to be brought back. I'll tell you what, I would like to move that we approve,
Make a favorable recommendation.
make a favorable recommendation, and if somebody wants to amend that.
Okay,
I'm good with that.
motion by Mr. Robbins to make a favorable recommendation on R-17-129. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Alderman McGinnis. Is there any further discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
One. So, 5-1. Motion passes. Okay. Other business, case number 3, adoption of the 2018 meeting and deadline dates for the Nashville City Planning Board. Does anyone have any comments? We have the proposed meeting dates in our packet. Any particular dates that look troublesome?
I didn't look at it.
I know we made a few changes last year.
I wouldn't mind looking at this for a minute. Can we?
Want to just table it?
Yeah,
next meeting?
I think we've had issues
We can do
with
that.
like doing this quickly.
We're okay, right, if we table it until the next meeting?
Yeah, you gotta look at it like against school vacations and all that kind of stuff.
Playoff schedules.
Yeah.
I mean,
So you making a motion,
March
Scott?
Madness.
Scott, are you making a
I'm gonna
motion?
make a motion to table this to be reviewed at our next
Motion by
meeting.
Mr. Claire to table discussion of the 2018 meeting and deadline dates. Second to that motion? Mr. Weber, any further discussion?
Yeah, just make sure everybody look at it before you come to the next meeting and bring your comments.
Yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, other business case number 4, and I'm actually going to recuse myself from discussion of this case, so Mr. Leclerc will momentarily take over his chair here for this particular item.
Yeah, I'm good. All right, so this is other business case number 4, referral for the Board of Aldermen and proposed R-17-134, authorizing the sale of land on the east side of Medical Center Drive to Southern New Hampshire Medical Center. I guess is there someone from the applicant here that wants to?
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead.
The board has a communication from Economic Development Director Tim Cummings.
Yep.
And he addresses this particular resolution. He couldn't be here tonight.
Okay.
And you also have, he's got a map of it on the back side of that communication,
Right.
as well as staff attached a little larger map onto what was sent in your packet. So you know the location of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I believe Mr. Cody from Southern New Hampshire Medical Center is here to speak to this as well.
Sure, yeah, come on up and give us any comments you might have.
Good evening, members. My name is Scott Cody. I'm the Vice President of Facilities and Emergency Management for Southern Hampshire Medical Center. We had approached the city as outlined in the memo from Mr. Cummings to purchase this lot. And I agree with everything that's been outlined in his memo, with the exception of the fact that the parking lot is in fair condition. Because if you've had the opportunity to go over there, the parking lot is in horrible condition. And our organization has budgeted what we believe is about $100,000 in capital funds to rebuild this parking lot entirely next year, if in fact we're successful in acquiring the lot for the purchase. But the pavement is in terrible shape. But interestingly enough, if you look at the map that was provided by Mr. Cummings, you can see that the lobby of this facility is actually located on that portion of the lot. And that the history of this dates back to when Dr. Squires actually founded the Matthew Thornton Health Plan and acquired this. This actually used to be Dearborn Street that ran all the way through to East Hollis Street. And at that point in time is when they created the change to what then was the Spring Street Extension, which is now Medical Center Drive, which is part of where the Public Works Barn used to be back in the 70s. All right, so looking back at all of this, it was a really kind of convoluted type of a program that was put in place. And of course, now the Medical Center has acquired 21 East Hollis Street, has additional development plans for that site, and would like to move to invest in the property, but quite frankly, only if we own it.
Okay, thanks. Any questions for the applicant, Mr. Rapucci?
I have a couple of questions, and they're pretty much based on my lack of knowledge, so bear with me a second. Was this parking lot part of the original concept of what was going to happen with land transfers when the whole CVS thing was being discussed, or is this a completely separate entity?
Completely separate.
Okay.
On the other side of the street.
I know it is, but I was just wondering if this was part of the consideration of what all the discussions about, you know, how land will be moved around. This wasn't part of that.
It wasn't, no. In fact, we did not acquire 21 East Hollis Street until after the CVS parking garage master plan was actually adopted.
Okay, so again, you're gonna probably educate me here quickly. So does that mean that the old Matthew Thornton building, is that 21?
That's 21 East Hollis.
And you own that already?
We do,
So you just want to buy the parking lot in front of it?
correct.
Okay, I'm happy. Thanks.
Awesome.
Mr. Weber?
I don't have the sheet for, you're gonna have to take care of it, because I don't have that sheet for approval.
Neither do I.
Oh, okay.
I'm good.
Well,
We're
this
good.
This is a referral, right? So, yeah.
Does that mean that the Board of Aldermen has already looked at it, or are they?
Well, they're asking for our
Blessing.
referral of one way, so that's all. We're not approving anything.
Do we get involved in, like, I have no knowledge of what the value of that is. We're only talking about the concept of the city selling it. We're not talking about
That's
the
correct.
deal itself.
That's correct.
Okay.
Price is $300,000 as it sits now.
Right, but that's got nothing to do
But
with
that
us.
really
That's-
doesn't have anything to do with us, and that's really what's germane to this whole conversation.
Yep.
They want to run it by us to make sure we can't pay, we don't have any issues.
Gotcha.
And we really
From a
don't
planning
have any issues. If we're going to sell it, we're going to sell it. That decision will get made over there. They just wanted us to look at it, and I was there when it was proposed, and everybody said, yeah, sure, let's send it to planning,
Gotcha.
just if we find anything. I don't think we have any issues with it, but
Any other questions for the applicant, anybody? No?
No.
Any questions for staff? Any comments by staff?
No.
Anybody want to make a motion on a referral?
no, you
I'll
do it.
make a
You do it.
motion
Because I'm going to
to,
be doing it on the other side.
Good, favorable.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Weber with regard to a referral to the Board of Aldermen for R-17-134, that being a positive referral. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None. Motion passes. Thanks.
Can you hold for, can you stay for a few minutes? I would like to talk with you after the meeting about something entirely different.
I'd much rather talk to you than see the Patriots game, Ed.
Meeting to,
Sorry about the Patriots.
the chair.
No, it's not about the Patriots. That's it, right?
That's all I know.
Discussion items, anything?
Any other discussion items?
Quick
Well, it's
question.
already going.
Not gonna be a long one. If one of us wants to make a proposal to the board to consider maybe a rule change or the way we do business, is it improper for us, for me or anybody else, to send that to the chair directly, or should it just be put together and then presented in the public meeting?
Let me just clarify what you mean. You mean like a change to our bylaws, like the process
Change
by which?
the way we do business sometimes.
Right.
It's an idea for everybody to consider, but
But you're not talking about like a change to an ordinance, like a recommended
well,
change to an ordinance.
not, actually, what I'm talking about is if we think, I'll say it in 30 seconds, so I don't tie us all up, okay? If we have, sometimes I've noticed in our conversations that we get into philosophical discussions about the way things should be, rather than the way the rules of the law is now, and we get tied up in that a lot. What I was going to recommend is that we just make a rule that, for ourselves, that if you want to discuss the way we should be doing something, whether it's us or another department in the city or whatever, we don't tie that to an application that's before us. Instead, we make that a separate item and then discuss it just on its merits. And if you wanted to make, for example, that suggestion that private roads don't get done correctly, and we have a problem with that in the city, and we wanted to make a rule for our planning board that said, when we're confronted by such an application, we're going to expect this to occur. We could do that ahead of time, not specific to an application, but we could do that so that every applicant knows that that's what's going to be expected of them by our board. I'm not talking about that rule in particular, I'm just saying our discussion about that rule. Because it's kind of awkward to just bring it up and nobody has a chance to think about it. But if you put it together in writing and you send it to everybody, are we violating the rules about communications? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two separate issues. They're sort of tangled up there. One is, we shouldn't be having the philosophical discussions during consideration of a particular application, and I think people are probably generally in agreement on that. And so the problem is like enforcing that, during the course of discussion. But there's a separate issue about if we're talking about establishing a rule that would apply to applicants. I think we'd have to give that some thought and probably talk to Corporation Counsel about the scope of our authority to implement.
But that was only an example,
Yeah.
whatever the idea is. Can we share it amongst ourselves prior to a meeting, or does it have to be presented at a meeting?
It's a
Really should
discussion
be-
item.
It should be in the
It should be
discussion
at the
item
meeting, but
end.
there's no reason you can't,
You can,
Yeah.
like, you could say to Linda or Roger, would you mind adding this discussion item to this, to the agenda?
Okay,
Or the, you know, the next
Just the
meeting.
item itself, and then the detail of it would be in the meeting.
Right.
Right, and
Okay,
then you can
perfect.
give, we can take it back, and as long as it's submitted and it's public record, we can review it, but we can't have discussion outside of the meeting.
Yeah, I was especially concerned with sending emails to everybody.
Yeah, you
There's
can't
been a
do
lot
that.
of rules, and
I would definitely not recommend that, you know. If you want to introduce something or discussion, why don't you send it to us, or, you know, maybe it's more appropriate to the chair to put it on for discussion, and he can look at it and say, let's put it on for discussion. If you need some direction or advice or maps or something from staff, or we can look at it too and give you some thoughts as well that might be helpful in your discussion, that might be productive.
Also, you might be able to get the deputy corporate counsel to come in and give opinions, talk.
Sure, it depends on what,
Right.
What
If
the
you
issue
know what's
is.
there, you can
right,
have that ready ahead of time.
exactly.
that's all I got.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second,
Second.
Mr. Weber, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And we are adjourned at 8:46.
Turn your phone back on.